And then on the agenda today, we expect the session probably to run for about an hour and a half, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But we've got some great content to share. So we're very fortunate to be joined by Spencer and the team from Bettys, who are going to be sharing more about their journey with SnapLogic and what they partner with us on. Jocelyn, who is our head of solutions engineering here at SnapLogic, is going to showcase how he and his team have built an AI enterprise assistant. Ours is called Jean-Paul, so he's going to take you through that in a little bit more detail. We will have a short break, just 5 minutes or so. I appreciate, especially in and around the UK and Europe, it's particularly hot, so feel free to take this 5 minutes to get some fresh air if you are like me and in a home office with very little ventilation and cool air. And then to finish off the session, we have Dominic, who's our product marketing director. He is going to share with you some product updates. And then, as I say, we do have some time at the end saved as well for any additional questions that we might not get through. So without further ado, I will invite Spencer to the stage, and he will take us through his journey with SnapLogic. Thanks, Spencer.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Welcome, everybody. Going to have work through the slide set that we've put up, take you through the journey that we've been involved with SnapLogic here, set some of the context for you, but fundamentally taking you from what was a fragile system into a fresh delivery. This is where we did a lot of work with regards to refactoring. So I'm going to walk you through, give you a bit of the background on who we are, Yorkshire business, in real life, what the production problem was that we were facing, the practical and pragmatic approach to the work that we did, which was refactoring in a very particular way, and hopefully that will resonate with you guys and really bring it to life as to kind of like some pragmatic approaches that you can take, give you some of those benefits and the real outcomes. And we've got some statistics that we can share with you as well with regards to how dramatically that changed for us, and then some key lessons to takeaways for you. So a little bit really to start off with about who we are. So Bettys and Taylors, people might be aware of us, definitely on the Yorkshire Tea side of it. We've been going for about 130 years, well over 130 years, 1,500 people. I've got some numbers for you. I had to put the word billion in there because I can never quite get my head around it, but 8,500,000,000 tea bags produced at any particular year. That's how much we've got. 35,000 cups of tea a year tasted, and there'll be a similar number of cups of coffee. Then 32 million kilograms of kind of product that we've been moving around. We're in 11 countries. We've got over 1,000 shipping containers being sent around the world on a year, and 13,000 plus invoices going through the system. All of those items that we're talking about all go through SnapLogic in some particular way. So it's to try and give you kind of like some of the size of the things that we're doing. Bringing that to life a little bit, particularly around why SnapLogic is important to BTG and how we've had it. So in 2018, there was a ERP project that was coming online, and at that point there was probably less integration points there, but now we've got about 39 integration points for that ERP project. So it was decided that architecturally we would have a piece of middleware put in place. So that kind of like gives you the background of why it was. Essentially, it enabled us to move towards enterprise landscape. And now we've got around about 400 applications, some of which require a degree of integration. Not all of those go through Snap, but all of the critical ones that we've got have some kind of interface, or will ultimately have some kind of an interface with Snap. And Snap really acts as that central integration hub for us to do within the business, so that if it's a point to point, and if it doesn't do anything else, then maybe we just go point to point. But more often than not, there'll be some reason where it just doesn't want to go to point, there's something else that's happening, and Snap becomes that core bit of technology that enables us to have something where we can have those endpoints abstracted and gives us some of that flexibility around what we're doing. Now, the particular situation that I wanted to talk to was our e-commerce platform and the integration that we had with our e-commerce. And critically, we sell fresh products that need to be with the consumer very quickly because they're perishable. So any delays in any of our infrastructure can cause problems with the delivery of those products, and even delaying them by a day can cause us significant problems because the amount of time that we want to ensure that the product is with the customer for the maximum length of time possible. Because for a product that only might have a shelf life of 3 days with the customer, missing a day on delivery or having it delayed by a day isn't really where we want to be. So we have that promise of delivering it to them as fresh. We want to decouple the way in which these items are being linked and the way the logic lives. And we also want to make sure that the pipelines are working as optimally as you can. And, we've got somebody ordering from them online. By the way, the fondant fancies and fat rascals are particularly good if you haven't ever tried one. So I want to give you a little bit of a background on where the actual problem was in production. So this is a very high level diagram of the core bits of kit that we're talking about. We've got Magento, which is our e-commerce platform, Adobe Cloud Commerce now, as it would be known. We've got an ERP, and we've got our fulfillment, and we've got, roughly speaking, the number of key pipelines, and each one of those core pipelines that we talk about might have many tens of sub pipelines within them. And what we were seeing during peak, day to day, there was no problem with these operating, and they were very performant for 90% of the year. The issue was that at peak, which is around Christmas for the delivery, the volume of traffic that was going through the system caused us problems. We're just going to dip into them in a little bit more depth. So the syncing of the pipelines between the different areas, it was difficult to actually understand where the problems were going. The updating of the process was blocking itself from running. So we might have a process that took 5 minutes to run, it would run every 5 minutes, and it might take a minute during normal operations. But at peak, what was happening was those processes would take beyond that 5 minutes, which meant that the running and the executions of them started to back up. What we had was essentially monolithic pipelines that ran from start to end. And again, during normal day-to-day operations, that wasn't particularly an issue. They ran perfectly adequately. It was at that peak processing time when the volume of customers on the website really started to cause us issues, and that the transactions were taking longer than the allotted amount of time to actually execute. So the orders weren't getting through. The other thing was that typically what we would do is we would process 100 orders at a time. And what was happening, that the individual orders within that were getting blocked, so that there might be orders that were not yet orders, they were pre-orders on the website. Somebody hasn't completed them, but they would be taking up one of the allocations in the 100 that were being processed. So there was a lot of things that when we looked into how operations were working, that there was opportunities there for us to optimize what was happening. The next diagram kind of begins to explain that. So at the top, what you've got is a pipeline being initialized and taking an e-commerce order from start to end. And during the majority of the year, that was fine. The synchronous nature of that wasn't a problem. We could process a batch of 100 orders easily. The performance of that pipeline was okay, and the time it took for that pipeline to initialize again wasn't causing us any problems. Then at peak, what we noticed was that we would start bottlenecking the orders coming in because the initialization was starting to become a factor for us. Then also that services were getting locked, processing timeouts were happening, and we also noticed that people who had yet converted to an actual order, which were pending baskets, took one of those 100 slots to be processed. So we did a lot of the Brad, who's one of the developers, is here to answer some of the questions later as well. They spent a lot of time doing analysis, looking at the statistics to work out where in the pipelines they were causing issues. So what we did was we came up with a refactoring approach, but these were essentially the headline kind of items that we were looking at. We had monolithic pipelines that ran from start to end. We were looking at a mixture of approaches in the way it happened. There was a fragility in the way in which the error processing was handling, generating a number of significant cases that needed to be processed. And so there were some hard-coded values. On the right here, you'll see a list. These are specific activities that were done during the refactoring process, where we filtered out pending orders, fixed issues causing double processing. So they're all kind of examples of the development activities that were undertaken when the refactoring happened. But the main two that we'll talk about today, which I think will be of interest to people, are initialization, ultra tracks, and message queues. These are all kind of the ones that delivered the maximum benefit to the processing. So we'll talk a little bit now about the refactoring approach and the way in which we did it. So if we looked at it, we could quickly say asynchronous, reusable, parameterized, and resilient. But really, the majority of the work that was done was around the asynchronous message queuing, ultra tasks, and a little bit of the reusable and the scalable. But don't think about it being rewriting code. It's more than just code. A lot of the work that was done there was about configuration and ensuring that the pipelines were scheduled and running correctly and able to rerun as opposed to be recreated as new tasks. So got a little bit of an example here. So the way in which a lot of this changed was that we took a pragmatic approach to the way in which the problem was resolved. So we still had the monolithic pipeline, but what we did was we implemented two key things. First of all, we introduced ultra pipelines, which meant that the initialization no longer existed, so that the pipelines would remain active so that we didn't have to wait for that startup timing. The second is that we used message queuing to then streamline that process of the way in which items were being processed and delivered. And that gave us significant performance improvements. The next diagram I kind of apologize for, but I'll explain it a little bit. On the left, so at the top, we've got before. At the top, we've got before the optimization work was done, and the two graphs at the bottom were after the optimization work was done. And what I'm trying to show here is on the left-hand side, you've got executions, and on the right-hand side, you've got documents being processed. And what we can see on the left, if you can, and apologize again for my high, where I've written high, what we've got on the left-hand side is where all of the high points were. So this is a heat graph showing you where the intensity of activity was. And in the top left-hand quadrant, what you'll see is that all of the high points for that year are all on the execution side. Yeah. So the highest number of the peak number of things being done were all around executions. And then if I look in the top right-hand quadrant, there's no high numbers over there. There's only one high number circled with the low going around it, which meant that in the year before the work was done, we had a high number of executions, but with a low number of documents being processed. So this is before we did the message queue, before we implemented ultra tasks. Then post the work that we did, and this is our actual analysis of the work that we did, what we had was the highest number of executions. It wasn't. So when I compare the numbers of what was happening in the year after the work was done, there was no high numbers with regards to the number of executions. All the high numbers for that year of where seconds were being spent was all on the documents being processed. So post the work that we did, we had a complete turnaround so that we had less executions processing more documents successfully. So this was a complete flip of the way in which that went. This diagram clearly illustrates, we're very close to the work itself, but hopefully you understand from that the performance improvement that we went from there. We've also got some specific examples here taken from pre-load testing results that we were doing. So kind of what you can see here is a description of the different pipelines that we were looking at. You can look at the old run times, the new run times, and then the percentage improvements with a little bit of a description with regards to what it is. We've got order management, stock management, and the fulfillment via MetaPack. And you've got all the different details. So what we were able to do was, with the load testing work that was done, we had an indication of what time savings or what performance improvements we would have. And with the graphs that you were seeing previously with the heat charts, we actually had the live data supporting those improvements, because all of these percentage differences meant that we could process more documents. Now, at a high level, what we were seeing was we moved from a high number of executions to a high number of documents being processed. So that ultimately meant that we were more efficient. The three figures are taken from very specific pipelines that we were monitoring. So on one of the pipelines, we were seeing a 95% improvement in the order update times. The introduction of ultra pipelines, typically where ultra was being used as the trigger point for them, we saw almost a 7% improvement in that time that it was taking to execute them as well, because we were saving that time for the pipelines to actually start because they were just available. So ultra was much better. And then again, one of the pipelines was showing us an 86% improvement in the processing time. All of those numbers there are really representative of what we were doing across the refactoring work that we were doing. I suppose if I was to sum up kind of what we would recommend to people who are engaging on a refactoring exercise, one of the watch-outs for us was that because of the nature of our data is highly complex, we've got manufacturing, production, we've got order fulfillment, that really, that problems are going to occur. So if you can work out what those problems are and design that out so that you've got them, where we were getting caught out was we were finding that we would take care of the majority of where the errors could occur, but there were edge cases of edge cases which were tripping us out. So that was really quite a key thing. Keeping pipelines small, it would be another guideline. We've got monolithic pipelines which work and are accurately work, but they're not performant, so that can be problematic. Standardize the boring bits. Yes, if you can, please do it. One of the real call outs is all of this work was built on the fact that we had statistics. So we took a lot of the data that Snap was using and our third party systems to identify where we saw bottlenecks. So the majority of the code base was developed before quite a number of people started working on the code set, but we were able to look at the statistics that we had from both within SnapLogic and within our third-party systems to derive where the problems were based on the timings that were being seen. And we also took a very pragmatic approach to that. We didn't refactor all of the pipelines. We looked at very specific elements within the pipelines and looked to migrate them to new ways of working. And I suppose the other thing is that we did build, and you've seen some of the dashboarding here, we did build dashboards to kind of make visibility in that area a little bit easier. That was pretty much a bit of a whistle-top store, and hopefully people find that of value. But yeah, if there's any questions, like one of my colleagues is here as well, who was the key developer, so we're available if you've got particular questions.
Thanks, Spencer. Really appreciate you taking the time to run through the work that you've been doing with your team in SnapLogic.
You're very welcome.
We don't have any questions that have come through yet, but the Q&A box is open throughout the session. So if anything does come to mind for those of you in the audience that you would like to ask Spencer and team, they will be here for the rest of the session. So now we will invite Jocelyn to the stage, who is going to share a little bit more detail as to how he and his team built Jean-Paul. So Jocelyn, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, based on where you are. So today I will walk you through what is production level agents in 2026 and how we're seeing the future and how we're investing in building applications to help you get there. To start with, I will use a little comic strip to make this a little bit easier to imagine. And starting from probably something some of you may have experienced as you try to take away the request of your let's say the employees of your company, of your business users, to turn it into an agentic application or an agentic workflow. So we'll give you 15 seconds to go through that. Good. Now, some of you can relate to that. Maybe some of you have moved past that. It's fair to say that things have improved, and whereas this used to be routine a year ago, now instead of 9 months, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 3 months. But it's still a challenge for someone in a business functions to go through what is an idea in their head, which I can picture but not always translate into clear requirements, into an IT organization that then take it away and come back with a final result. And it often takes a lot of back and forth because agents are non-deterministic. So the way that they output the information can require a little bit of experimentation for the users to really come down to what is it they exactly want and in what shape. So let's look into what it could be in the future. That image might feel familiar to some of the attendees that have used SnapLogic for many years, mostly because in our language, we often refer to what's called the citizen integrator, someone who can self-serve integration. And that vision that we have, we want to translate it into the work of agentic AI. And what if we can imagine a world in which your end users, wherever they are in the organization, can make a request and leverage those large language models to drive an outcome. But in the world of the enterprise, it's more complicated than it looks. It requires a lot of access to systems, and it requires a framework to make it work. So what is it exactly that you need to get to the promised land? Well, we're going to divide that into 4 buckets, 4 categories, if you will, of things that needs to be done for you to be able to do that. First, you need your agents. That's the intelligence as a service. That's what became a new capabilities about 3 years ago when ChatGPT came out. But one agent is not enough. As the use case that you want to build for the use case grows in volume and complexity, you need to have the ability to orchestrate not just the actions of a single agent, but possibly the actions of multiple agents, and to distribute the task across multiple workers. This is one of the big evolutions of the last 12 months. You've heard about agent to agent, but the way that it works nowadays has changed quite a lot. You need your integration. Your agents will not be helping anyone if they don't have access to information on data. And that data sits in your system of records, it sits in your data platforms, and it also sits in a number of applications and utilities that people in IT aren't always familiar with, because your employees and the business functions often use point solutions that you don't really need to connect between each others. If I look into my sales team, for example, or BDR functions that look into new companies that we can work with, have enrichment tools that we never really connect with from an integration perspective, but they're very important in the work that we do. And for an agent, you need to familiarize yourself in how you leverage your systems. And finally, you need the governance. And the governance isn't just about securitizations of the access. It's also about securitization of the action. An agent is going to make decisions on your behalf. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's a little bit risky. And we want to have that safety net that helps the agents do the most of what it can do with requesting permissions from the users. Or we want the agent at least to take preparation steps of a certain fall before it can take a next step. These are the kind of things that we build in what we're going to show later. Now, to help you frame the where you're at as a company in your journey of adapting agentic AI. If we look back at the start, we have those ad hoc AI applications. Think ChatGPT, think Copilot, great for productivity. It can help you nowadays do a lot more than it used to. It used to be there to answer questions. Now it can create assets for you in the form of documents. If you want to make a presentation and you have an idea, you can go to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and it does this straight away. And it's quite impressive. It's very useful, but it doesn't speak to your systems. Then comes your AI assistant. The AI assistants have access to your applications, but it tends to be one agent per use case. That's what you can build in Agent Creator. That's what you can build in Copilot. That's what you can build with hand coding, with LangChain and Crew AI and all those. The difficulty there is that you push all of that complexity on the users who have to make sense of tens, if not hundreds, of AI agents that are available oftentimes in catalogs. And each of them has too little use for them to really want to reuse, and it doesn't really take off. Then comes what we qualify as shadow agents. So shadow agents are a more powerful architecture and generally leverage what's called an MCP client. Think OpenClaw or Cloud Core or some of these applications that are coming out. They are much more powerful. The reason they are powerful is for a few capabilities that change drastically the approach. One, typically they have access to computer in the form of terminal command lines, which means that they can do a lot of the actions you will be taking. Second is they can manage a large quantity of tools and instructions in the form of skills instead of having a prompt which is specific to a use case. But most of these solutions are black boxes, which are very difficult for IT organization to monitor, to audit, to control, to enforce guidelines upon. And we want to make this architecture work for you. So that's what we started with when we created Jean-Paul. And these agentic applications we called enterprise AI agents. Now, some of the terms that you will hear nowadays fall into that bucket. For example, agent harness, which is a combination of the connectivity, intelligence, but also the governance and securitization. Even further forward, you may have heard of agent operating systems, also a compass that we use as we imagine tomorrow and build capabilities into the agents. So you don't have to build so much yourself. So see where you're at in that journey. And then as you speak to us in the future, we can help you understand what are the steps that are needed to go from one to the other. Today, we're going to focus on the last box. Now, the outcome that you get is you don't really have an agent catalog anymore. You still have that depth, but the agent is going to manage the complexity on your behalf. And on the screen, you can see that at the top, there is a lot of access to various systems. This is just a subset to picture, in a way, typical application family that you will connect with, your CRM, your data platforms, your ITSM tool, and so on and so forth. In all usage of the applications, we have about 250 tools in our production environments that connects to maybe 25 systems. In all the deployment that we've done with some of the early adopters of the agent, we are working towards a similar landscape, but it's their own systems, it's not ours. This is the part of the application which you will be most familiar with. It's the integration layer. It is using SnapLogic MCP server capability so that you can very rapidly create MCP servers wherever the application that you work with do not provide one out of the box. And you can, in addition, use your MCP gateway to secure the access to those tools. Dominic, in the later part of the sessions, will speak about all evolutions from a product perspective, but know that it's very, very mature and it's much easier than you think. We also have a library of pipeline tools that can help you connect to hundreds of applications, and we are more than happy to share them with you. Once you have that connectivity, you want your agents to be easy to find. This is the left-hand side. Your end users do not have to learn about any new solutions. They will find the agents where they typically look for help, which is your communication channels. Whether you're using Teams or Slack, or you want to communicate with it with a good old email, that works. You can also schedule an action, which is an intuitive way to automate a task so you don't have to be the one to drive it all the time. And from an output perspective, the agent can help you answer questions, of course, but it can create a lot of content on your behalf. Just like you've come used to expect from tier 1 chatbots like Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, Jean-Paul can create documents in the form of a PowerPoint, so you can create a slide presentation 5 minutes away from a meeting you failed to prepare because you're too busy. You can create an Excel spreadsheet, so you can take it away and do analytics where you feel comfortable, building graphs in a Google spreadsheet. You can create a PDF, so you can share a document which is secure and cannot be tampered. And more, you will see that you will find yourself creating HTML pages. You don't really have to think about it. But agents have become really capable of creating software. And that means that if you want to create a report or a dashboard or a presentation that is really slick, HTML will become your go-to. What's really good about Jean-Paul is that regardless of the option that you choose, he's going to host it on your behalf. So you can share it internally without having to bother. And that will make it very easy to find in the future if you want to come back to it, update the document, and share it again. At the bottom, some of the key components that make the application work. First, you need complete auditability, not just from an audit perspective, but also because it's your only way to make sense of what the agent does. And as IT specialists, even though the business users will have the ability to create a lot of those use cases themselves, you want to be able to troubleshoot when something doesn't go as expected and be able to understand the actions that the agent took, both from a communication perspective, what was the ask, how did I respond, but also from a technical perspective, what tool did I call, and sometimes go into your SnapLogic platforms to troubleshoot it. The action that the agent takes needs to be gated. These are not soft instructions. These are policies that can force the agent to take a step and deny it access to a particular tool based on conditions. This could be to read documentation, which is best practice. And as human, we find it as hard as the agent, but please trust me, agents don't like to read documentation more than you do. The cost control is there. As you start to use agents more and more, they are great, but they're not cheap. And this will give you visibility and the ability to put limits. And finally, you heard myself speak about skills earlier when we were on the maturity slides. Skills are your prompts today. They are your SOPs for agents. So rather than to have an agent per use case, you have a skill per use case and the agent can pick and choose on demand. This can be created from yourself. This can be imported from the outside, but more importantly, the platforms give you the ability to introspect what were the good actions in a set of actions taken by your users in an ad hoc conversation and turn it into a skill. So it becomes really seamless. Now, last slide before I show you what the platform looks like. There are layers to that. And we want to leverage your systems wherever possible, so you don't have to rip or replace or reinvent. For your communication tools, we don't need to create a new one. You likely have one. I will use Teams for these demonstrations. We use Slack internally. If you use something else, we can expand to it, but that tends to be the common tools that we find everywhere, and they work just fine. Jean-Paul server, which is the application that I will present, takes care of the orchestration, manage your session, your skills, your sub-agents, and all of the functionality that makes the agent so effective. The large language model that we use is going to be Claude. It can be provided from Anthropic, but it can also be provided from Azure, from Google, from AWS. You can find it everywhere nowadays. The MCP tools are in the SnapLogic platforms, which takes care of the connectivity and the securization. If you need to authenticate that a user that accesses these tools is who he says, and can only see the data that they are entitled to, that's where it happens. And the business systems are your applications on data platforms. Still very much the core of where the knowledge of your enterprise is, and your end users will continue to interact with these systems. So don't forget about them. Now, let's go into an example, right? Now, I need to stop sharing and start sharing my screen. So hopefully I will do this right. Okay. Okay, I can see my teams coming on the screen. So as we discussed earlier, no need to go into a new applications. All the users need to find is the agent in your organization. Here, me, Jean-Paul. Now, let's ask a simple question to start. Let's ask the agents to introduce himself and to give us a high-level overview of what it can do to help us. It's a natural way to communicate, and we can see that the agent has started to do some work. One thing you will notice is the agent has a personality that has been slightly customized. We gave it a more engaging personality. It's a little bit snarky. We found it helpful to drive adoptions at SnapLogic, and the users generally are very amused, and that encourages them to come back and ask a more meaningful questions on the second try. It's something that you can personalize, of course. You can personalize it at an org level. So your customers, you want a different version of Jean-Paul, that's okay. You can also customize it as an individual level because it's not to everyone's taste. All right, here we go. We can clearly see that Jean-Paul has an ego. It's the most important employee of the company, according to it. We can agree or disagree, but we will find out that it's quite effective. It's also giving us a high level of the system that it can access. You can see that in this environment, which is demonstration environment, it's access to Salesforce, BigQuery, Zendesk, also has access to a GitHub repository, so it knows about itself, for example. Meeting transcripts, Content Hub, which is with published documents, and so on and so forth. And it's giving us a high level of what we can do with it, which is interesting. So for the next step of this demo, I will change hat. I'm not the product leader anymore. This time, I'm a sales leader. And I will ask a question and specify to Jean-Paul that I want it to be in a new session. I'm going to be the manager of a sales employee called Brad. And I want to prepare before a forecast call to understand where Brad is at. This is a way for me to see if the activity that are coming to a close is on top of. And if not, how can I help him get there? My job eventually is to provide him guidance and then to report to the leadership. We can see that Jean-Paul is sending us a quick response and an indication that it will need a little bit of time to come back with an output because there is work to do there. What's interesting as well is that we can see the action happening in real time. So the agent is doing quite a bit of work in the backend, and we get that visibility. So we don't have that white page anxiety that is it working or not. We can also see that it identifies that it's quite a complex request, right? It's using high effort in that case. We'll see that later in the monitoring. Now, I can wait for this to complete, or I can simply scroll back up. We'll see in a moment that it finishes, but for the sake of this demo, I'll show you the final outcome. Maybe interesting as well to make a quick pause here to explain to people that in this new generation of AI agents, you don't mind that they take a little bit of time to do the work. On the contrary, you want them to be able to work for as long as is needed to complete a task. The more complex, generally the more value. In this case, we have the result. And we can see at a glance some of the information is straight in the chat. If that's sufficient, I can continue from there. But we can see as well that a document was created. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that you will create more and more of these web pages. You don't really think about it. You just see a link, you click on it, you have your dashboard. A bit like if you were in a Power BI report. Only as an end user, you can create them however you want. In this case, we have the pipelines from Brad. We can see that he has done quite a bit this year, but more importantly, when I look at his opportunity, he's closed 3 deals already, so I don't have to think about that too much. Brad clearly is doing good. But there is one that's closing in the next 30 days, and it says that it's in negotiation, but it's closing in like 16 days, 17 days. I need to do my job. I need to find out a bit more about that. So I will go back to the chat, and we can see that it has completed again, right? So we wouldn't have had to wait this long. It's right here. I can click on it, by the way. The report looks exactly the same, and there is a reason for that, which I will explain in a moment. But immediately what I want is to learn more about this opportunity, which is still open. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question. I want to learn more about that opportunity here, the one that closes on, I think, was it? Oh. Soon, right? And let's see if Jean-Paul can help me with that. Now, when I say I want to learn more, you can see that I added a little bit of an indication there. I wanted to see if we had any meeting with them recently. Now, Jean-Paul, in addition to having access to our CRM, where it found this information, he also has access to a repository of meeting transcripts, which are recordings of our conversations between our sales teams and our customers. This is very useful. And if you've been close to AI use case, it has become a resource which is quite looked after. If you used to like Zoom or Teams or Gong, they give you that capability. Now, Jean-Paul is smart. He's found that we discussed that before. So he's giving me the high level again, which is fine. Here, he's telling us that the deal, which is forecasted for the end of the month, oh, wait a second. He's telling me that it's not Bob, it's Brad. Yeah, when you look at my message, I said Bob, not Brad. So clearly, I made a mistake as a user, but the agent was smart enough to figure it out anyway. I do have Brad mentioned. He knows from the context of the conversation whom we are talking about, but he's letting me know that, I'm not perfect. All good. Clearly, we haven't spoken to them recently, which is not a good sign. Does the opportunity reflect current state? Not really. A stage 4 will generally be forecasted at 75%. That is not the case here. All right, let's see if we can further get some assistance there. What can we help Brad? Eventually, I don't want to just go back to Brad and say, Brad, this is not in good shape. I want to give him some guidance. And AI models have a lot of training on sales methodology. They are quite good at that. You can further improve it if you'd like with your own methodology and your own best practices, and that will come in the instruction of the agents. But out of the box, they know quite a lot. They are smart. Now, I'll wait to see if he can give me some guidance, and that will help me prepare for my call, and then I will be done. Okay. All right, so first we give him the high-level information on what we discussed so far. Makes sense. Then we need to get on a call with Kristen, right? That's the key stakeholders from that meeting transcript that we found. This is good advice. If we really want to close the deal by the end of the month, we need to take action. If none of them happens, though, best to change that due date. Now, there is more you could do. Eventually, you're in control. You want to make an update to your records? You can do that. You want to expand the reports from Bright to the rest of your team? You can do that. you want to be really creative about this report and keep on tweaking it, you can also do that. But for your people that are the enabler in this concession, I will go to show you what this looks like in the backend. So you have a better understanding of how the agent functions. Now, we are in the audit trail of Jean-Paul. This website is the companion of the conversational interface. It is very important, both for users and for an administrator. On the left-hand side, in dark shade, you can see there was a lot of menu items there. I'll come to it later. And if you're curious, it really warrants a dedicated session. But for today, let's focus on the audit trail. You can see that I'm identified in here, and I'm also identified from my identity provider. You can see that I have access to a lot of MCP servers here. So it's not just the one, it's a combination of MCP servers that give me access to a variety of tools. In fact, 96 tools, which is quite a lot for an agent to manage, but we make it work. And interestingly, the agent uses a skill called sales forecast. I'll come to that in a moment as well. But that skill is key because it gave clear instructions to the agent what to do. And as you see the request, it started by reading that skill after it sent the initial message, and then went to query or CRM to find the information that I require. This one in red is useful for you to introspect. It's red because the agent got denied access to the CRM when it made the first request. And it got denied with instructions to go read the documentation that we have for Salesforce. When you deploy Jean-Paul, the first thing you have to do is if you have systems of records or data platform that are customized, the agent needs to know what's in there. Otherwise, when it queries it, it will make mistakes and tell you incorrect information. This is one of these policies that I mentioned earlier. And you can see that the agent didn't do it on its own. Despite instructions being present in the instructions of the agent, it's lazy, right? Or overconfident, one of the two. Now, it goes on with the context, and it knows what it needs. So it goes for specific context item. It's a built-in part of the platform, by the way. And it looks for the opportunity and user items for the CRM. And it received a textual descriptions of all the fields that are present in these systems, all the pick list value that it needs to be aware of when it made filters, for example, on stages or things like that, and all the customization. And that enrichment of the context on the fly ensures that when the agent makes queries afterward, it's much more likely to get correct information and to do it at a lower cost. The query to the Salesforce systems, if you're familiar with SnapLogic, is an API call going through MCP. So here we can see the SQL query, which is created by the agents to find the information for the users. And it will carry on like that step by step by step. That's the part that you can build today in an agentic orchestrator like Agent Query on Copilot, assuming that you fit within the context windows of the LLM. Where it gets more interesting is on the second part, the agent will work on the file systems. And it has a private access for each user to a little pocket of the file systems to do all the transformation that it needs on the document. And from there, by creating the file, it's going to eventually publish. It creates that report that you saw earlier. As we follow up, it doesn't create a new session or a new conversation. It continues on the existing one. So you can see at the top, message 1 out of 3. This is our second question when we asked about the meeting transcript and whether Brad spoke to anyone at these customers lately. And this is our third question to see if anything can be done to help Brad. That continuity of the sessions is managed by an intelligent router that we create in the application, so you don't have to manage it. The agent does it for you. Now, the last thing I want to show you before we end that presentation is a skill that was created here. The Salesforce skill is the instructions that help the agents be very consistent from one execution to the next. So every time you prepare for a conversation with Brad or one of your other employees in that case, it's always the same. The skills are generally created by users. The Salesforce skill is right here. It will include instructions on when to use it and what it does. And these instructions are effectively a prompt, but it's used on demand. It typically will include the details of the query that need to be run with any of the MCP tools. This was created from such a conversation as you saw earlier. Instead of creating the skills first, the first time I asked that questions, I said I wanted a report. And then I had 4 or 5 steps where I said, I want the report this way, and I want those columns, and I want that background. And then I just clicked on the create skill button. And what Jean-Paul did at that stage is retrieve all of the instructions that were working and useful from that sessions and created the skills. So for the users to do so, it's very intuitive. Okay, there is a lot more to the platform that enable the agents to be able to service a large population of users from a single enterprise. And I could spend the rest of the afternoon showing the example of what you can do with it. I will show you just one more, and then we'll conclude. Let me go into another environment here. It's still a demo, so don't worry about it, even though it has quad code on the name. I wanted to show you what it would look like if you were to do a really complex use case. And on those, people in IT are still a necessity today because the agents, when they manage a large number of systems and a large context, a large volume of data, can still struggle to reach a consistent outcome time after time. In this case, I asked for an account plan for a company called NovaBio Corp. This would require access to a variety of systems. Salesforce for history of the opportunity, BigQuery for the usage, assuming they are a SnapLogic customer, Zendesk for our interaction with them from a support perspective, and public information from the internet on their strategy objective, which are quite important for us when we prepare for a QBR, so review, like we typically do review a couple of times a year with our customers, sometimes more, sometimes less, but we try to do our best to stay up to date and understand what are their goals and how can we support them. And I want that to be assembled in a manner which is intuitive for me to review. Now, the agent took a little bit of time to go over all of this system. This is one of those processes that typically can take north of 30 minutes because for some of our largest customers that have been working with us for almost a decade, it's a lot of data. It's also a lot of usage data. It's a lot of information about the estate. It's a lot of really effort for the model to get there. But when I click on this, I access this report. And whichever customers I want to create it for, it would look like that, and it will be complete. And I can have the confidence that the information is correct because it follows a very precise set of steps. In this case, we have a card that starts with the details of the account. Then we have the strategy goal. This is internet search. If you build AI agents, doing web searches 12 months back was possible, but was still quite difficult. And in this case, it's all there with reference links and with curated information that follows a specific set of steps. We have the opportunity history, so that's all of our commercial engagements, categorized, and we even have a timeline at the bottom that gives us a visualizations of what is our history with this account. The health of the account, the volume of tickets that we have with them over time, their estate in terms of the capacity that they use with our platforms, which is important for us to understand if they are a heavy user or small users, if they have enough capacity, they are growing, or perhaps if they are rationalizing, which is also okay, we just need to know, and the usage over time. And all of this require the agents to distribute the actions between sub-worker, because individually it's fine, but altogether it's too much context for the agents, and at the end of the day, it will trip itself over. That progresses every day, right? The models are getting better and better. But for now, we still need to help the agents drive that consistency. And that's where you can come in to kind of help with those high-value use cases, which are a bit more complex. All of those, you still build in the Jean-Paul application. You create those skills like you saw earlier, and it has just more instructions and and more specific steps. So typically, you can create a task list and so on and so forth. No, that's enough for one day. So I'll go back to the presentation, Anna. I have a couple slides to close, and then I will hand over to Dominic. Right. So what you want to build in your environment, it's up to you. And is Jean-Paul possibly a good option for helping you get to that outcome faster? Very happy to discuss it if you're keen. And you will find me, by the way, in the Integration Nation Slack channel, which is a community Slack channel. So if you want to have a quick DM, just find me there. But really, I want to go back to the fact that it's much easier than you think. All the connectivity to your systems we have today. We have more than 700 of the tool pipeline that already exist. That is in addition to what vendors have started to provide with out-of-the-box MCP server that are public. Reminder that we use 250 of those in our environments only, right? So the numbers can seem big, but they apply to you and they can help you deploy in a matter of weeks, really. But really what you will build is what's interesting. So let me know if you have an idea. If you're not sure, then we can touch. And we want to take care of the early adopter. So we are in, let's say, early access. So the product works, it's very mature, but we want to make sure that we can provide the necessary, let's say, focus to the people that want to deploy it now, so that we can learn from the interaction and they can get a very fast-paced response times on evolution and enhancements. So we have this white glove trial. We started with 3 customer implementation. That was last quarter, and they are all in progress and doing well. And now we are ramping up to 10. So if you want to be one of these 10s, you're free to connect with us, and we'll be very happy to have a conversation with you. You will get a direct access to the people that are building the application. You will have the opportunity to share the roadmap and help us understand what are your needs and what are specific. And we want to keep it small for the time being before we scale that. So call to actions. If you're interested, connect with us through your customer success manager, through your account executive, or again, reach out to me on Slack. Thank you.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Before we continue, we have had a couple of questions come through. So Spencer and Brad, if you want to join Jocelyn on stage, and then we can pose them before we have a short break. First question. Let me share this and everybody should be able to see it. So what are the best practices to evaluate run statistics like pipeline runs, peak performance, etc.? How are you evaluating those? And are there any SnapLogic APIs available for that?
Yeah, which is a great question. I suppose the way we started was, and the best place to start is probably with Monitor. So go into Monitor, get comfortable with what you're seeing. And then there's an extensive amount of APIs that you can use to extract the data. And depending on how complicated your pipelines are, you may need to do some work around what you're extracting. The other point to note is that Monitor only keeps data for, is it 2 months or a month? So you're limited as to how long it's there before you need to extract it. So it's a process that we have on that extracts that data daily. And then ultimately we're taking it into Fabric to then do visualizations on it. So that's kind of the strategy that we've got. But Monitor's a great place to start and then move on to the APIs to get really what you want. Because then once you've got it out into something like Fabric, you can add more contextual information from maybe other third-party systems as well. So we, for e-commerce, getting order numbers running next to statistics on pipeline performance is really key.
Just to add in, specifically about our load testing, so Spencer is monitored more from the production side of things, but before that, we'd done an element of load testing, and that was, to be quite honest, that was probably the first time we'd done load testing. So we were quite new to it, and it was a bit of a proof of concept. But some of the things, like how we sort of approached it, were to do with trying to control variables. So prior to the load testing, we made sure that we used a dedicated SnapLex that was only being used for the pipelines that we were testing, which removes any variable of the SnapLex just also being overrun with other tasks and things like that. We tried to establish comparable load tests, and we did that by filling up the message queue with all the messages that, or all the documents that we wanted to push through before we switched the Ultra pipelines on, so that it had like a fair go at doing them all at once in one load. And rather than measuring the total duration of how long it took to process X many documents, we looked at the average duration per document to get like a like-for-like comparison. And the reason for that was because we had retry logic. So there was a system before stuff gets to either our message queue or SnapLogic, and there was a retry logic in there that could make it so it'd retry the messages in an hour or something like that, which wouldn't have been a direct comparison. And then finally, there was like an element of knowing your data and your process. So we had an example where initially, and you'll see in the notes on that, if you look through the slides later, you'll see in the notes on that slide, we had an example where it actually looked as though it was quicker before the Ultra task, but then we realized that actually, no, it was that for some reason previously it took 2 runs of an integration for it to actually fully process one document. So it's knowing your data and your process so that you can sort out those niggles and account for those, really. Yeah, I don't know if that would count as best practice, but there's definitely an element of controlling your variables, knowing your data and your process, and trying to get like a like-for-like comparison. So we were confident before it went into prod that, yes, we had these X percentage improvements. Thanks.
Great, thank you both. Another question for the Bettys team. Are you using any agentic processes at all?
Do you want to go, Brad? Take this.
So I think generally, like bluntly speaking, AI generally, we are still at the very beginnings of things. So we use Copilot, and that can, help with loads of different things, and it's starting to help with code and things like that. But we're also looking at doing a proof of concept with Claude. I would say we do use SnapGPT, and that I think for me has definitely improved in the last year or two, in that when it first started out, I was struggling with it a bit, but then now it can suggest, like if you've got a problem, you want it to generate an expression or do something like that, it can generate an approach. It can then validate the pipeline, test its approach. If it didn't work, it can then evaluate why and suggest a new approach and test it and so on. So I think it's come on, SnapGPT has come on quite a lot, but I think aside from that, in total honesty, we're still quite at the beginnings of using AI, really.
Yeah, there's trials in the organisation. I know that we're doing some work in Atlassian tool sets as well. So we've started to build out some agents in Atlassian, but it's very early days.
Thanks both. And Jocelyn, we have had a few Jean-Paul questions come through. So most importantly, why is it called JP/Jean-Paul? If you can share with the group.
Yes, of course. So I guess two sides to the answer. One, we initially called it Jean-Claude because he has that, let's say, argumentative French personality, and we found that was a good way as well to find it easily in our Slack workspace, so it's not confused with names that are too common. And then we changed it to Jean-Paul because we don't want to get sued by Anthropic.
Since skills for Jean-Paul can be created by the users, are there any mechanisms that prevent overlapping of skills, 2 or more skills covering one use case?
It's a very good question, and that's part of the governance bucket in that presentation that I made. So if you want to kind of learn more about that, it really warrants having a bit more times, but on a high level, we have the concept of groups and roles. So the users can create a skill for themselves, and they can then promote it to a group, whichever department. And there is a role that has the approval rights for that skills to be promoted to a group. And some of those can be global because they are system-wide. So if you think of the skill that was created earlier for the sales forecast, it would absolutely make sense for it to be group skills for the entire sales organization.
And final one for you, Jocelyn, before we have a quick 5-minute break. Are there any inbuilt capabilities in Jean-Paul to analyze SnapLogic pipelines to recommend improvements, etc.?
So if you've watched our latest release notes, and I don't know if Dom has prepared to speak about that or not, but we now have a SnapLogic MCP server that gives access to some of those functionalities in an MCP server. So Jean-Paul can consume that with about 20 seconds of configuration.
Perfect. And with that question answered, we will just pause for a quick 5-minute refreshment break. So if we come back at 1:15, if you're in the UK, 5 minutes, you can keep the Goldcast window open, and we will give you a shout when we're back ready to welcome Dom. So see you again in a few minutes' time. Welcome back, everyone, to the last section of today's Lunch and Learn session. We are wrapping up the session with some product updates from Dominic. So Dominic, if you want to join the stage, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks everyone for joining us for the product update section of the Lunch and Learn. So without further ado, let's dive in, because there's some big changes to talk about and a few small improvements. I always like to quickly go through recent releases. The July release is extremely recent, so you're forgiven if you haven't had a chance to get to grips with it. But the June release also had some good things that's worth talking about for a minute. And then we'll give you an idea of the future directions of the platform as well. So starting with the June release, the major theme of the June release was a focus on the performance and usability of the platform and of certain specific features. So nothing that we need to spend a huge amount of time on, but for instance, for Agent Creator, there were new agent snaps launched with the OpenAI Responses agent and the Google Vertex AI Gemini API agent. Also, the agent visualizer now captures the system prompt, so you can see that in your agent visualizer as you develop agents. Meanwhile, for Git integration, we launched the ability to select a specific folder for checkout. This had been a request for users who wanted a bit more granularity in versioning their pipelines and their tools and everything. And so I thought it was worth flagging that one because it was one that had come up a fair amount. But probably the headline feature of the release is the MCP Server Pipeline Builder. So this doesn't actually change how things work behind the scenes. You still have the ability that we launched earlier in the year to turn any pipeline into effectively an MCP server that you can expose so that your agents running outside the SnapLogic platform have the ability to call that. But it was a little bit finicky to get that all set up. And so what we did was we introduced a one-stop shop, a wizard, which the animation on screen is showing, so that you can get all of those fiddly steps done in one go. It'll check your inputs and make sure that everything is done as quickly as possible. So it doesn't really change how things work behind the scenes. It just makes it a lot easier to connect anything that you've been building in your AI development tools to the business systems and data that it needs access to in order to be useful. And given that we already had questions about agents, I hope that is welcome news to at least some of you. There was also a question earlier about Monitor. There have been some improvements to Monitor in the June release. So the infrastructure page, if you haven't been in there recently, has been redesigned with switchable views, different ways of sorting and viewing the information, and enhanced metric charts. I've got a couple of examples here that are pulled directly from the release notes. But again, if you'd been dithering about moving to Monitor, we are working to make it an extremely powerful tool that gives you all of the information that you need to do the sorts of things that we saw in the Bettys and Taylor's presentation to understand the usability of the platform. And that does include also some updates to the APIs and the information that they return from Monitor specifically in both the June and the July release. So again, worth looking at if you're trying to access this information programmatically as well as via the GUI. There is one thing to make sure people are aware of, and again, just since we mentioned Ultra pipelines, if you do use Ultra pipelines, it's just worth noting that Ultra scheduling, Snaplex Ultra scheduling, will be enabled by default for all of the environments that are using Ultra pipelines. So this is the ability to manage the start and restart actions at the Snaplex level rather than at the control plane, and it means that your environment is more robust to losses of connectivity between a Snaplex and its control plane. So if you have some business critical processes, if you're going for high DR targets, that sort of thing, then this is the sort of feature that can be useful to know about. So that's coming in the August release. So it's not something that's turned on now, but it's something that wants to make sure that everyone was aware of in case that changes anything for you. If you're not sure whether this applies to you, probably doesn't, but it's worth checking. Ping your CSM, your customer success manager, if you want to dive in. That was the June release. The July release has a lot more new features. So let's talk about those. Jocelyn already stole my thunder slightly, but there is an entirely new way of working with SnapLogic. We call it Snapcode. And basically, it does what you can see here in the graphic. It lets you work in Claude or whichever AI-enabled development environment you prefer, but we're starting with Claude, and interacting directly with the SnapLogic platform to build new pipelines, which can then in turn, as we said, interact with the systems, the data, the business processes that you're currently using to run your business. So this is a bit of a change. SnapLogic had always been very much all about the graphical development environment, the no-code environment. And what we realized is that these days, our goal of citizen integration, of enabling more and more people to build their own automations, no longer goes through a graphical drag and drop user interface. It goes through natural language interactions with one of these agents that can then build out any technical artifacts which are required. So this is the very first release. Stand by for more functionality to launch in upcoming releases, but there's already quite a lot to get to grips with if you're interested in this development mode. So Snapcode, the idea is to let people go from cloning the environment to their very first pipeline in under 30 minutes. There is a little bit of setup right now. This, again, is something which will be further streamlined. Part of the problem is, though, that the agentic development environments themselves are evolving pretty rapidly. So we're chasing a moving target ourselves with our own development. But the goal is to have a one-time setup, everything pre-bundled, containerized, nothing that you have to mess around with too much. And from that point on, you have natural language pipeline development. You can just describe what you need in your Claude environment, in the terminal or in the Claude Code app, and receive ready-to-use SnapLogic pipelines. So that gap that we always talked about, the gap between intent and automation, is further reduced through this new methodology. To be clear, this is not displacing the graphical development environment. This is a brand new option that we're introducing alongside the GUI that we all know and love. But straight from the terminal, you can build, refactor, validate, import, export, run pipelines, and do that all in your preferred development environment. And this also brings cross-platform accessibility as well across all of the big OS platforms. It's agent agnostic. Right now, you use a Claude Code front end, but the idea is to have multi-agent support beyond Claude Code in the near future. We already have some internal experiments running, including working with some customers, and would be happy to talk to you if you have specific requirements and you would like to be part of those early beta tests. And a lot of this relies on the new SnapLogic MCP server. So this is not to be confused with the MCP support that I mentioned before, where you can turn a pipeline into an MCP server to expose functionality to agents. This is an MCP server for the SnapLogic platform itself. So that's what Jocelyn was referring to earlier, that can use MCP to access basically platform API endpoints, so that you can set up the platform, run pipelines, manage the platform, and you have the PyGen toolset, which is the one that actually does the AI-assisted pipeline generation. So again, this is all about making existing integration capabilities that our users have been developing in SnapLogic directly and natively accessible to agents without having any additional development effort around that. Whether this is because you have pro coders, professional coders who are living in Claude and you'd rather that they run their integrations to a governed platform than trying to roll their own and potentially getting in trouble, or whether this is something that you like to use yourselves in your own lives, or whether there is an entirely new third population of people who you think can explain their needs in natural language and get value out of this and further extend the value that you get out of your investment in SnapLogic. This is all great news, I think, for all of us. We would love to work with you on all of these use cases and stand by for more news on that front. But there is also the new SnapGPT that's launched with the July release. So thanks to the Bettys and Taylor's team for the endorsement of the existing SnapGPT. The new SnapGPT, the big headline is it adds a plan mode. If you've been working with agentic development tools, then you may have encountered similar concepts already. So the idea is that it will validate with you the requirements and what it plans to do before it actually starts generating. Especially as the complexity of the tasks that people do with SnapGPT increases, we want to avoid the situation where the thing goes away and churns for a long time and comes back with something that's not quite what you meant. We'd rather that it enter a dialogue with you and validate exactly what it needs to be doing, and then goes off and potentially uses the think mode and builds out something more complex. So this gives you, the think mode gives you the ability to generate multiple interconnected pipelines from a single request for the first time. Previously, it was only one pipeline at a time, and also refactor those more complex workflows directly from SnapGPT. So don't think that because we introduced the Snap code that SnapGPT is not also continuing to evolve. These are two core features, core AI-enabled features of SnapLogic. At some point in the future, there will probably be some sort of convergence, but we're still a long way away from that point and figuring out what that would even look like. Although, once again, we'd love to hear your views and your requirements if you have them, so do get in touch. Something else that SnapGPT can do is it can now do agentic generation itself, including things like reusable expression libraries that can be used across multiple pipelines. Or for the first time, it can generate full MCP servers. So once again, MCP servers are a perfect example of what we mentioned on the previous slide. They're not just one pipeline, they're multiple pipelines operating in relationship with each other. And so a big reason for adding that capability of generating multiple pipelines at once was also to be able to support the generation of MCP servers directly from SnapGPT. And something else that is important to deliver maximum value from these AI-enabled tools is to provide them with as much context as possible. So we've done a lot of work over the years with SnapGPT to do things like expose the pattern library to it and guide it to use any private patterns as well as the public patterns in there. But now you also have an explicit project context selector, so you can choose specific assets from your projects so you can give the context for more accurate pipeline generation and also refinement. So again, trying to make this as efficient as possible, a way of developing or co-developing, let's say, with AI inside of the SnapLogic GUI. So you might think that's quite a lot for the July release with Snapcode, with the SnapLogic MCP server and the new SnapGPT. But we have also continued to move ahead with more traditional sorts of development, let's say. So there is the new Snowflake CDC Snappack for change data capture from Snowflake. That has been something that has been a long-standing requirement. So it's great to have that specific table support within a date and time range, included with the existing CDC Snappack. There's also improved management of child pipelines in the monitor. So again, as I mentioned, the monitor is continuing to evolve. So you can see the list of child pipelines for a particular parent pipeline that you're looking at. And there's a navigation header so you don't get lost in the hierarchy. And this is important. Again, people were already using child pipelines before we added the MCP server support, but with MCP support, that has absolutely exploded. And so having better ways to manage and observe those in operation, in practice, in production has become a must-have, and that is now live in the monitor. We've also continued to evolve the LLM Snappacks. Something to be aware of, though, is that this also means that some snaps have been deprecated and will be removed. The full list is in the release notes, but if you've been using some of these older LLM snaps, then you may want to double check that they've already been removed from your pipelines. This is in response to the functionality that they call being deprecated by the LLM vendor. To be clear, this is not something that we're cutting off. It's a functionality that's going away, so we're simply reflecting that so people don't get confused. And the classic manager is also going to be going away in August. Project manager is the default. So just something to be aware of. If you haven't been using project manager already, then this is a great opportunity to get familiar with it before the official cutover. With that, let's close by talking quickly about some future directions. So we like to talk in terms of now, next, and later. These are not, for those who've not attended a roadmap presentation, these are not specific timeline commitments. It's just now is what we're actively working on. Next is pretty well underway and coming really soon now. Later is more still in the design stages, still vaguely out there. It's coming at some point probably, but no specific commitment. So just to let you know the expectations. If you have anything that you specifically want to hear more about, by all means, get in touch once again. So without reading through this line by line, because I realize we're getting to time and we want to leave time for Q&A, but we're going to be doing a lot of work, continued work around resilience and security, around disaster recovery, for instance, but we're also increasing the granularity and fidelity of the open telemetry that we export, and more governance for agentic workflows via MCP. One of the things that people have been asking for a while is pipeline throttling to enable better resource management in their environments. So that's something that's starting to see the light of day, with the idea of then enabling full process isolation, pipeline level process sandboxing. So that's a little bit further out because it requires the throttling to be in place beforehand, but that is something that I know is going to make a lot of people happy when it's fully live. We are, though, also continuing to work on the AI agents and the AI-driven development. So we talked about the MCP server, the SnapLogic MCP server. There's more support for MCP observability coming, as well as the ease of use. The creation wizard that we saw is the first step, but there's more there. As the usage patterns of MCP starts to crystallize, we also are starting to implement and automate those with the end goal of having a full unified catalog of every way that you can interact with something, whether it's via MCPs, via APIs, or whatever it might be, and full governance and observability across all of that. In terms of development, we talked about the SnapGPT update already, in the plan mode especially. Slim, for those of you who are using Slim, who have heard about that, that's the SnapLogic intelligent modernizer that helps you migrate from legacy integration middleware tools. So that continues to receive support, or let's say validate support for new platforms. So we've recently added Talent and Tipco, and there's more coming. If you are on some sort of legacy integration platform alongside your SnapLogic and you would like to concentrate and consolidate on SnapLogic, we now have a way of doing that that is faster and less risky than trying to do it by hand. And so it may finally unblock your colleagues that have been resisting you on that front to get everyone into the good place with SnapLogic. What else is worth mentioning? Yes, auto configuration, connector generation, just more use of AI throughout the tool for development. The idea being that you'll be able to just point the AI at an endpoint eventually and generate the connectors that are needed to talk to that endpoint. And finally, continuing with platform connectivity. So lots of new connectivity coming, continuing with the theme. So CDC for SAP HANA, Viva Vault CRM, SAP Event Mesh, lots of connectors keep on coming, both from SnapLogic internal development and from our partners. If there is something that you are pining for, by all means, get in touch. Let us know. Once we know the demand is out there, we can work with you to help satisfy that or give you a better idea of timelines. But you'll receive all of these slides afterwards, so do read through the list and get in touch if you have questions, thoughts, comments, feedback. We want to get in on some of the demos of some of the new functionality that I described, and so on. With that, I believe we still have a few minutes for Q&A.
Thanks, Dominic. Yes, we've had a few questions come through, although I know that Jocelyn has been answering most of those by typing responses to them. We have had a couple whilst you've been talking, Dominic, both actually on relatively similar topics. So both around Slim. So can Slim help migrate point-to-point integrations from MuleSoft to SnapLogic? And then another question around the same thing, but in regards to Oracle SOA Suite.
So I'm not directly familiar with MuleSoft, so I don't know if there's anything weird about point-to-point integrations that I should know about. I do know that we have successfully migrated MuleSoft integrations using Slim. We'd be happy to try. The best approach is to get in touch with your account team and find a few representative integrations that you can share. Representative in terms of the levels of complexity that we might find in the actual environment, but obviously not sensitive, anything that you can share with us. Although, of course, a specific customer asked, I'm well aware is under NDA with us, happy to work with you directly. Similar answer for Oracle. I don't know Oracle SOA Suite directly. We have done some Oracle ODI integrations, and I don't know how different they are, but again, we'd love to try. The approach we're using in Slim is agentic, so it is fairly omnivorous in what it takes in. And once we've taken a first look at the output, then we can determine, how much tweaking would be required to get this into a place where it's usable and give you a more sensible answer. So the best option is to get in touch with some samples and we can run them through.
Thanks, Dominic. Just before we wrap up, I just wanted to let everyone know that Integrate, our annual user conference, is returning to London again this year. We have a new venue and a refreshed format. So we would love to see as many of you there as possible. We are busy working on the agenda, but you will be able to hear from, again, the likes of Jocelyn, Dominic, and a number of our customers and partners. So it's always a great day, and we always love to see as many of you there as possible. And with that, just want to say thank you very much for joining the session today. Thank you to Spencer and Brad from Bettys supporting, and obviously Jocelyn and Dominic for their work as well. We hope you've enjoyed the session. As we said, we are recording this and we will send out the materials over the next 24 hours or so. Of course, if there's any other questions that come up, you can either send them over to me. You should all have my email address, or if you are already involved with the SnapLogic team, you can get in touch with your account team. So we hope to see you on the next one. Thanks again for joining, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.